In this video, I'm going to show you an extremely important first century urn. And what's so special about this is actually what the inscription says. So make sure you stay tuned to find out. The cultural view of head covering is that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul is dealing with a local situation to where women were coming to the church service with their heads uncovered. And this was only localized because in that culture, if a woman didn't have her head covered, she'd be showing herself as promiscuous or even as a prostitute. So it's saying that in that culture, women just wouldn't go bareheaded. So it was scandalous for a woman, especially to come to church without her head covering. Now, the problem with this is that it's contrary to the archaeological evidence. For example, Dr. David Gill says, public marble portraits of women at Corinth, presumably members of wealthy and prestigious families, are most frequently shown bareheaded. This would suggest that it was socially acceptable in a Roman colony for women to be seen bareheaded in public. So Dr. Gill is pointing out that in Corinth during this time, the public marble statues and portraits that we see are most frequently showing women bareheaded. And that shows that it wasn't socially unacceptable for women to be seen that way. And this is pointed out by others. For example, Dr. Cynthia Thompson, who's an archaeologist, she did work on Roman Corinth, and this is what she said. Because most of the women's portraits presented here portray women with uncovered heads, one may infer that bareheadedness in itself was not a sign of a socially disapproved lifestyle. So Dr. Thompson, looking at the archaeological evidence that she has for Roman Corinth, is saying, look, when I look at it, we see women most frequently bareheaded. And one more example, Dr. Kelly Olson, she's not a Christian. She wrote a great book called Dress in the Roman Women. This is her area of study that she teaches. And this is what she said. The vast majority of female portrait busts we possess show the woman with an unveiled head, probably in order to display her elaborate hairstyle to the viewer. So talking about the female portrait busts that she sees for Roman women, and Corinth was a Roman colony during this time, she's saying they're most frequently seen bareheaded. And so the problem is that the archaeological evidence just doesn't line up for the cultural view. You most frequently see women bareheaded. So then how is that evidence countered by those who hold to the cultural view? Well, somebody like Dr. Bruce Winter, for example, he says, praying and prophesying with their heads uncovered in the Christian gathering were replicating the attitude and action of new wives. Now, what's a new wife? Well, Dr. Winter wrote a book on this, and this is his definition of a new wife. The new wife, or widow in the late Roman Republic and early Empire, was the one whose social life was reported to have been pursued at the expense of family responsibilities that include the complex running of households. Life beyond their household could involve complex illicit liaisons that defied the previously accepted norms of marriage fidelity and chastity. So Dr. Bruce Winter is saying that if you see a woman with her head uncovered during this time, which is what most of the archaeological evidence points to, she's likely promiscuous or she's a feminist. Now that's something that you can't tell by just looking at a bust or a painting. You can't ascribe motives. That can only be done through literary evidence, not just by looking at it. So some people who hold to the cultural view say, hey, in the first century, a woman just wouldn't be seen with her head uncovered. That's just not going to happen. It was just completely socially disapproved. She'd be advertising that she's a prostitute, but then the evidence doesn't line up because we most frequently see women bareheaded in Roman Corinth during that time. So then others flip that and just assign motives to the woman. Well, if she appeared that way, she was likely promiscuous or a feminist. So now I want to interact with Bruce Winter's view by showing you one piece of evidence, and this is the urn that I talked about at the beginning of the video. So Vernasia Cyclus is the woman, and her husband created this urn in order to honor her as she had passed away. And so it shows the couple together and then an inscription. And I want to read the inscription to you. Here's what it says. To Vernasia Cyclus, that's the woman's name, the best mate. She lived for 27 years. Vitalis Friedman of the emperor, official scribe and chamberlain, Now, Vitalis is the husband, and he's saying that he was a freedman and that he was an official scribe and he was also a chamberman, so that's about him. Now, I want to point out, this is what it says right here about this man's wife. To the most faithful, most loving, most pious woman. Now, that's incredible. Not only do you see the woman with her head uncovered, you see that this was created to publicly honor her. And you can't ascribe motives to her and say, well, she must have been, dodging home responsibilities, and she was a feminist, and she was promiscuous. No, the husband details. This was his best mate. She was pious. She was most loving. She was most faithful. And he did this in a way to honor her. He didn't say, oh, well, make sure that she has her head covered in this picture, because if not, it'll be seen as scandalous and everyone will think that she's a prostitute. No, he knew that by portraying her with her head uncovered, it would not signal that. So I think that's a pretty strong evidence against the cultural view of head covering. And now if you want to learn more about head covering and you want to see the biblical argument, you want to see the church history argument, and more about the cultural situation in first century Corinth, you can either get my book, Head Covering, A Forgotten Christian Practice for Modern Times, or if you want, you can also study for free at headcoveringmovement.com/study. Thanks so much for watching.